Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Lareina Yee, who is a senior partner at McKinsey and chair of the McKinsey Technology Council. And we're talking about the latest, the third annual Tech Trends Report. Lareina, good to see you.
Very nice to see you.
So what's different this year? Let's start with that. I'm assuming generative AI. From what I saw, of course, that's a newcomer. But anything else that really stood out for you?
Well, generative AI is, of course, the newcomer, and boy, does it get a lot of interest and excitement. But the way that we look at this is we look at interest, we look at investment, we also look at patents and IP. And so generative AI, applied AI, machine learning, that's the star of the show in terms of interest. But interestingly enough, in terms of actual private investment, the two winners are electrification and mobility. So one of the things we like to say, Diane, is while generative AI is a star, there are also 14 other stars that are pretty bright.
Well, let's talk about that. I'm assuming the two categories you mentioned are very capital intensive, so that would be one of the factors as to why there's so much investment. But give me a sense of the breadth of those 15 different trends you're looking at.
Well, we took over 100 different trends. I mean, there are so many ways. It's a candy store when you look at technology, especially over the last 5 years. And we distilled them down to 14, which we reported on last year and this year. And then we added generative AI. So they include things like connectivity, they include cloud, they include edge, they include electrification, mobility, bioengineering. And so we're looking at the swath of things. And what's important across all of these are not momentary trends. These are trends that will affect us over the next decade, maybe even the next 20 years. These are the emerging trends. They are not things that we may be doing each day of the week. And even when we look at things like cloud and quantum computing, they're very different in the spectrum of readiness, but there's so much great innovation in cloud. And that's what we're trying to zone in on and appreciate is how are these trends evolving and what's new.
So I know there's a certain follow the money aspect to this, and you mentioned where certainly electrification and I think climate certainly is something that a lot more people are talking about, especially right now. Give me some sense of the numbers and what has changed from last year in terms of both the potential and the investment. You mentioned how much money is going into these areas.
Well, the total number is $1 trillion of private investment. There's a lot of money going in across these trends. And, some of the ones that we feel that we spend a lot of time on, I call them the steady growers and innovators. They are things like cloud and connectivity, which every year is an enormous amount of enterprise investment and some new innovations along the way. And so that's actually a really important piece. So for example, in connectivity, one of the things that we're starting to see is more integration to different ways that you can create that output. And one of them is the connection to satellite. And so that's kind of space tech and space to earth applications and ways that can basically give us more connectivity because we're really hungry for connectivity if you think about our daily lives. And so that's kind of the big thrust. There's also just appreciated innovation. So most people were having the debate last year, is quantum computing 10 years out, 15 years out? Will we ever get a qubit? And what was interesting this year is IBM had a really interesting innovation, and we're starting to see some of that come a little closer. Now, I'm not saying it's the next 2 or 3 years, but if we were to pull back the capabilities of quantum computing so that maybe they could be more enterprise ready over the next 5 to 10 years versus 10 to 15, that's going to make a huge difference, particularly in fields like life sciences.
When I talk to CEOs, there's a certain paralysis that sets in because you mentioned generative AI. There is so much hype. At the same time, if you're an enterprise, and I like talking to McKinsey because like other consultancies, you get into rooms we don't get to go. You're talking to CEOs. Protecting your IP in this climate is very important. Knowing where to put your money, even that difference between applied AI and generative AI. I mean, what are the problems that people are coming to you about that you think are reflected in this report?
Yeah. Well, with generative AI, I very much see it as a catalyst, and a catalyst that is very sparkly, but also really brings in deeper investments in data analytics and capabilities for companies. And for most companies, they'll say, I've been on this AI journey for a while. This is not new. What's new is the ability to do some of it in different ways, the ability to reach more people. And it does have an impact. When we look at automation technologies overall, inclusive of the impact of Gen AI, one of our recent reports showed that it was a $4.4 trillion opportunity over, call it a few decades, right? But it's
Yeah.
a meaningful set of things that could happen for the enterprise and for the corporate sector. So, I mean, the one thing it's big, it's not just generative AI, it's actually all of data and applied AI. And the other thing is that it will also spark and trigger and change demand in other arenas. So, for example, you think of connectivity, that we just talked about. You also think about the chips, which a lot of people talk about because they use specialized things called GPUs, which are different than the typical way that we power our technology. And they'll also provide a renewed opportunity for just software, which we know that software was one of the big standouts this year in terms of innovation and growth. And so I think that in many ways it's positive because it's opening up demand across technology. And we know that at the end of the day, that's a competitive advantage for companies.
It's interesting you mentioned chips because I think about, Taiwan chip maker, was it TSMC last week, delaying its major investment because of a lack of talent. You added talent this year. That's a really interesting area because we've seen huge layoffs in the tech sector. We've heard a lot about the displacement of talent that could happen with generative AI. Talk about the talent picture and what you're seeing.
Wow. So we can only go as fast as the people we have and the brains that we have, and we are in a scarcity. Overall job postings and overall job demand was down 13%. And what we found is when we track the job demand in these 15 trends collectively, up 15%. So global jobs demand down 13%, tech related ones up 15%. So there is an opportunity in there. The challenge is that the demand and supply don't perfectly match because in often many cases these are specialized skills. So machine learning, this would be Java programming, understanding of AWS or other cloud platforms, microservices of capabilities that are under those job postings. Now, obviously someone is not posting a job. I'd like someone to be in charge of microservices, but those are the things that they're looking for. And so what will be critical is when we have growth in jobs on one place in tech and a reduction overall, is how do we manage those transitions and give people access to boosting their skills so that they can be in line with opportunities.
So I know this particular report looks at the private sector. Obviously, there's a public sector component where we're talking about education and training. Where does that intersect, especially in the U.S. compared to other countries?
This is critical. You're going to absolutely need the triad of academic institutions where our talent is born and comes from, public sector, government supported money, as well as private sector money. Now, so you need those three components. If we were to compare and just take a walk back to the internet
Mm-hmm.
and the birth of the internet 40 years ago, we had quite a lot of government supported funding for what was able to then become the companies that we know now that didn't actually exist before. So that academic and public sector government was a really important component. It will continue to be now, but if you look at how the innovation is happening, there are some nuances. Just take the STAR, generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
That really came out of the 2017 Google paper on transformers and those academics. And a lot of the innovation to create those large language models that we are now actually all understanding, that was private sector money. Google was spending hundreds, billions of dollars on that, as were other companies like Meta, like AWS, like Microsoft. There are a lot of investments that were enabling this moment of shift in technology. So all that is to say is that I think the private sector investments are playing a significant role because many of them have the scale and ability to do so. And it'll still be the three, but the dynamics are a little bit different right now.
It's a good point. It's almost like the overnight sensation that's a decade in the making, because we forget that these investments really took place a decade ago and are now bearing fruit in many cases. I was intrigued by this diagram that you had where Web3, forgive me if I see it as a what's hot, what's not. That's not the case. It's about innovation. But Web3 was toward the bottom. Applied AI was toward the top. What does that represent? What does that tell us, that particular diagram in terms of, is that about innovation in particular? And because Web3 really sort of was hot, and it seems at the moment not.
Yeah, it's taking a year-on-year look. What's really important is we believe all 15 of these will continue to be on that scatter plot over the next 10 years, and we have to be patient. Some of these will rise up and, will sort of titter a little bit and then come back. And so I do think we need to have a decade plus view of these, but what this is just showing you is what the year-on-year change was. If I were a decision maker in terms of allocating capital, maybe on the business side of it, I think the important question is not which one is on the grid year to year, but what is the portfolio of 4 or 5 of these technologies that over the next 5 to 6 years is going to help make my business more competitive.
Yeah.
And that portfolio approach is really important. And the question that for business leaders is, okay, now that we've distilled in the report where the trends are, what they are, how they're being applied. We have a lot of how they're being applied in business. Which ones do I need to participate in? And what does it mean to participate? Do I need to build it? Do I need to invest in it? Do I need to apply it to my products? These are the practical questions which we hope the report gives a nice basis for discussion.
I'd be remiss not to mention that you're the former Chief Diversity Officer at McKinsey, and for many years you were involved, I think you were actually the genesis, you're the co-founder of Women in the Workplace report. Put that hat on, and as you're looking at these issues, there's a lot of concern about this increasing the digital divide, whether women who've already been, impacted negatively by the pandemic may fall further behind. Just curious to get your thoughts on that, Lareina.
Yeah. I mean, Diane, personally, my 2 passions, diversity, women, as well as technology. So I love the fact that I have a question that puts those 2 together. Normally, they're considered very separate. Look, over time, when we look at the data, particularly in the US, we typically see that women are active, if not more healthily consumers of and users of the technologies, but they oftentimes are locked out of being the decision makers. By that, I mean the people allocating the capital, the top team of organizations that are creating these technologies in leadership roles. And we've seen that in the Women in Workplace report that you mentioned year over year. And we see that in the tech sector, it's very hard to get even near parity at the entry level. So oftentimes these are hovering at 35, 40% women, even in entry-level jobs. So that's the overall piece. I think the question is there a promise for difference? And, does something like AI, generative AI, open up more inclusivity? Does something like the 15% increase in jobs open up more opportunities? And I think that's not a technology question, it's a human question. If we want to see more women have access to these new jobs and the demand for jobs, we're going to have to invest in reskilling and upskilling programs and make sure that women are healthily participating and have access to them. If we want to see more women in leadership roles, we're going to have to do the hard work in the companies to continue to develop the small proportion of talent we have into leaders. And that's the hard work that humans have to do that the technology isn't dictating. It's a human question.
So I get back to those, CEOs in the room or CIOs, CROs, whoever, who are coming to you with some of these challenges. What advice do you have to them coming out of the intelligence you've gleaned from the research you did this year?
Technology is a strategic weapon or a strategic advantage, however you see it. So it is imperative that companies and CEOs are looking at which of these technologies can be that competitive edge for them and investing accordingly. It may be Gen AI, that's certainly getting a lot of attention, but I might look more deeply. I don't think you need to do all 15. It's probably 3 or 4, but those 3 and 4 are difference makers. And so the question to business leaders is, which technologies are business difference makers, and are you investing appropriately?
Great. I can't think of a better place to end than there. Lareina, thank you so much for joining us and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Diane.